pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call.
Larry Cohen.
Here.
Betsy Dennis.
Here.
Jennifer Edge. Excused. Christine Galbo.
Here.
Frank Arnott.
Here.
George Patchen.
Here.
Mary Beth Stevens.
Here.
Bill Zopp.
Here.
Melissa Thompson.
Here.
Mr. Hilberg, would you review the fire exits?
Yes, the fire exits are at the rear of the auditorium.
And would you like to introduce our workshop?
This evening, I'm pleased to introduce my friend and colleague, Anne-Marie Barteroni, who's going to talk about the budget. But she was very kind and allowed me a small portion of the presentation, in that I would just like to put the next year's budget in context. Beacon is extremely fortunate, and we want to thank, and Anne-Marie will do this, the state legislators who have supported the addition of state aid, so that you will see that Beacon has a budget increase of 1.07% budget to budget, with a tax levy at the cap of 2.79%, while maintaining all our programs for next year. It's absolutely phenomenal. If you read what's going on throughout the state, we're very, very fortunate. Those numbers have been corroborated most recently by auditors from the Comptroller's office. So we're confident moving forward that we have a good story to tell tonight. I'd like to thank Anne-Marie very much for your continued diligence with this.
Thank you. So I'm going to start my first slide. It's basically just recapping exactly what the superintendent just mentioned. So we are extremely happy to show that Beacon's budget that will go to the taxpayers in May will have a budget-to-budget increase of 1.07% and a tax levy increase of 2.79%. That was the direct result of the legislative budget that then became the final budget. So Beacon received in the second draft of the budget over $600,000 additional state aid, which was wonderful because the other options were not something that we wanted to look at. So we wanted to publicly thank our Assembly and Senators, Assemblyman Frank Spartatos, who does the City of Beacon, Assemblyman Kieran Lawler, and Senator Gibson, who were all involved in this, and thankfully Beacon was able to benefit from the additional state aid. Again, Mr. Hilberg mentioned the proposed budget preserves the current level of programs, and so that's a pretty important part, that we're very proud of. I know this slide looks scary, and I've showed it before, but I do want to just show you it again, because it did change a little bit from when I presented it to the budget to the board a few weeks ago. As Mr. Hilberg mentioned, the Comptroller's office signed off on this tax cap calculation. They do their budget review every year. That's part of the deficit financing bond that we still have out. We have a couple more years left. The good part of that is that they look at our tax cap before we go out to vote, whereas all the other districts kind of get a review after the fact. So they kind of make some assumptions, and they may be right or wrong. This way, at least we know exactly what is allowable and where we are. So the top portion of the cap calculation stayed basically the same. We had the prior levy. Beacon did get a tax base growth of 1.057, so we were able to increase that top number a little bit. Part of the calculation is adding and then subtracting lower the pilot programs, payment in lieu of taxes that we get from the City of Beacon. You have to subtract out the prior year exemptions. The more important part of it was the retirement plus retirement, teachers' retirement. That was a big number. Teachers' retirement percentage is going up a significant amount. So for part of the tax cap calculation, we are allowed to exclude anything above a 2% increase. So we got an additional 2.4% of what we think it is. So with all the numbers at the bottom, the maximum levy increase is 2.79%, which is what we're bringing the budget in at. Some of the cost savings that are included in the proposed budget. In retirements, we did offer a retirement incentive to some of the teachers, to the BTA unit. In total, we have 4 teachers retiring from the district this year in June, and 3 of those positions we are not replacing. We also had some retirements in the clerical unit. We did a reorganization of the clerical positions in central office to save some money there. And in aides, monitors, and custodial, we're looking at positions that people are that are leaving the district, and we're not going to fill the positions. So through attrition, we're going to leave those positions not filled. Careful cost containment in all the budget areas, and the board knows that they, as part of the workshops and the finance committees, we heard from all the department chair people, and all the budget areas showed an increase only in the contractual obligations, which mainly was the salary area. In some of the budget areas, you didn't see an increase at all. It was flat. Those people had the salary increases, but they were able to save money in other areas. Operation and maintenance was an example of that as well. So we were very careful in all the departments to keep it tight and only increase where we really needed to increase. Frugal debt management. We are currently in the final stages of refunding one of our bonds, the bond that we floated for Rombout Middle School's renovation and addition. As you know, the interest rates are great, so refunding for a school district is like refinancing your mortgage if you decide to do that, which a lot of people are doing. So we're currently doing that. We came in at a 1.5% interest rate. Over the life of that one particular debt, we are going to save $3.4 million over the whole life, over the remaining 20 years. We had done a refunding in the fall, and we also were part of the dormitory authority refunding. So all of our bonds we've taken a second look at. We've reduced the interest rate, which allows us to manage the levy a little bit better, to keep the levy down and reduce the budget in that area. And negotiated agreements, we had several units that we were negotiating, and all but one has settled, so we're all in good shape. Several of the units took a delay in their step movement. They took a small increase, a moderate increase, which really helped us build the budget for this year and the coming years. Another scary slide with lots of numbers, but I will show you the important parts. The bottom right-hand corner is 1.07%. That's the budget-to-budget increase that Mr. Hilberg had mentioned. This is basically how we pay for the budget. We talk about miscellaneous income. I'll start all the way to the left. As you remember, last year, 2 things are different that we included last year that we don't have this year. We had a legislative grant from Assemblyman Scartatos, the $250,000 that was there, and also a transfer from the capital fund, that was capitalized interest that we used to try to keep the levy at the cap. This year in the proposed budget 13-14, you'll notice the tax reduction reserve. We received net a little over almost $1.1 million from the sale of the old high school. Law requires us to put that in a reserve, and law also requires us to use that to reduce the levy. So we have 10 years to do that. We sold it a few years ago, and we haven't had to use that reserve. So now we have a system in place where we're going to start taking that reserve down a little at a time to help us maintain the levy. So we're using about a fourth of that, about $275,000. You'll see in the state and federal aid column an increase of $86,000. That $23 million includes that extra $600,000 that we got from the legislature and the Senate. And then basically the number at the end, or all the way at the top, the tax levy. Again, the next important part there to the right is the levies at 2.79%, exactly at where the cap is. So this slide just basically puts the tax levy in perspective. So we calculated what the 5-year average was prior to the tax cap, and that was at 3.4%. Last year's levy, 12-13 levy increase at the cap was 2.07%, and what we're proposing for 13-14 at the cap is 2.79. Both last year and this year, well below the 5-year average, below the cap, so we feel it's a responsible budget with still living within the cap and maintaining the programs that we have. I'd like to talk also about the bus proposition. That was the budget information. The bus proposition we have put up for vote every year since I've been here. And we are trying to maintain the fleet that we have without trying to increase the taxes too much. So we're trying to maintain and do exactly what we need to do. We're asking on the Proposition 2 that you will be voting on in May for 2 72-passenger buses and 1 20-passenger van. So the board heard in part of their workshops and Finance Committee all about the buses and what we're planning to do with some of them that we're taking off the road. Some of them will be used as spares. All of the 72-passenger buses, all the 4 that the transportation supervisor wants to leave as spares, all of them have over 190,000 miles. So they've all been used very well. It's just wear and tear on the buses, and it's not that we're going to get rid of them. We're going to surplus some of the older ones that are now used as spares and bring these in to be used as spares. And the vans that we have in the fleet, he's only looking for one. Most, if not all of those vans have over 200,000 miles. We have a great mechanic staff who do a great job maintaining those vehicles because they do a lot of downtown traffic. Some of them go out of district for special education, so they're used a great deal. There's some days where there isn't an available bus to be had when we have sports trips going out in the afternoon and we're trying to do the regular run. So it's very important to maintain the buses that we have and try to rotate on a regular basis. The bottom, the transportation state aid ratio of 57.7%. What that means is we get transportation aid at 57%. So that means we get over half back for what we spend for buses. So it's a great deal. It's spread out over a 5-year period, but basically the taxpayers are really only paying for less than half of what the buses cost us. And that was my bus. I want to mention contingency budget. I will go into it in a little more depth at the hearing that we have the week before the budget vote. I just want to stress again, the new tax cap law that went into effect last year had a significant change on the contingency budget. Years ago, we used to be able to take the budget from last year. There was a percentage we were allowed to increase it. It was sometimes around 2%, which was the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. But with this cap being close enough to 2%, the contingency budget rules changed. So now we're at 0%. So the contingency budget means you must be at the budget level that you were at last year. So for us, that would mean cutting from our proposed budget $656,000. And at the budget hearing as well, you will hear some of the things that we would have to entertain. There are certain things in law that if you have a contingency budget, things like facility usage. A lot of groups use our buildings on a regular basis. A lot of not-for-profits use our facilities, and they don't pay to use them. That would all change. You'd have to use like a fair market value type of thing. We'd have to close the buildings earlier. There's no equipment purchases. So there are certain things, and I'll get into it a little bit more detail at the budget hearing, but I just kind of wanted to start the process and the conversation of showing where we would be if the budget were to fail and we were to go to contingency. This slide just basically puts Beacon in perspective with the other districts in Dutchess County. So at the top line you'll see average cost per pupil in the county average is $18,211. In Beacon, our cost per pupil is $14,808. We are now 13 out of 13 in total pupil cost. What that means is that we are basically giving the students what they need and what they have at the lowest price possible, without cutting programs. So we are at the lowest. We are also 13th out of 13th in the administrative cost per pupil. So lots of people usually during the hearing ask us about administrative costs. I just wanted to kind of throw that in there as well, that we are 13th out of 13th in that area as well. And I'd like to, we have another, see? The budget vote is May 21st. It is 7 to 9, and it's at Beacon High School and Glenham Elementary School, the same two locations that we had it last year. Does anyone on the board have any questions? Yes.
I have a question, maybe more of a statement to explain a little bit better for the audience is, when you looked at your slides from last year to this year, our increase is really 1.07%. And that some of the slides make it look at what's driving us to that 2.79 is the teacher retirement system. But I think it might be worthwhile to know what I've taken away from our meetings is that the cost that had been absorbed by the state is not being absorbed by the state, and they are now requiring districts to pick up more of that tab. So I was just wondering if you could talk about that a little bit, explain it, so that the public does not think that the teachers' retirement system has improved for those individuals that teach in our district.
I can use an example, and Barbara's probably very familiar with this example that I'm going to use. But one of the things that the state changed was that they don't send the test materials down. They don't send the test booklets down for regents. So what we've incurred is if it's emailed or you get it off of the internet, you have to make copies. There's a lot of testing involved. They are not giving us the resources that they used to do. So now the districts are responsible for buying all the paper to make all the copies for the testing. They're responsible now when you're printing and making copies, you're buying the toner. There's just so much. Copying has become an extremely large expenditure in the district, and that's all changes that the state has made to save costs at the state level and getting pushed down to the district. Not necessarily in the newspapers where you're reading it, but that one is the most significant change that we've seen, cost related. So there are other mandates that the state, are requiring. Barbara's struggling every day with all the changes that the state are making and pushing down to the district, which they're not really telling the public about, and the districts are absorbing it.
So I just wanted to highlight that.
Okay, thank you.
We're at 2.79, in my opinion, because the state has pushed costs down to us that we have not had to absorb in our budget in the past.
Yes.
The buses.
Okay, go ahead.
I love to talk about the buses because I relate to the buses as I would relate to my own car. And if the state would offer me 58 cents on a dollar to buy a new car, I would have to be crazy not to. So if for some reason our bus proposition, well, let me take a step back. Some people ask me, well, if we have so many buses, why do we have to buy new buses every year? We've got so many, so why are we buying them? Every year a bus proposition comes up, and I try to explain that the reason why is because our buses aren't all brand new all at one time. They cycle through every few years, and every few years a couple of them are older than the next year, and so the older ones get cycled out and a couple of new ones get cycled in. So it's kind of like a revolving door. The oldest ones go out and then the newer ones come in to replace them. And that's really just a really simple explanation. Anne-Marie mentioned that we've got a great mechanical staff. We also are one of the few districts with a bus garage. DOT in the state of New York says that most buses are supposed to last between 8 and 10 years. Our buses last between 10 and 14 years. Our buses are older than most buses in most districts because we take good care of them and because we've got a bus garage and really good mechanics. We've been able to eke out an extra year or two, and it's never been a safety issue. We've got a higher safety record than most districts. as far as our bus conditions. But again, they do need to be replaced. If for some reason our bus proposition does not go through, what would happen? How would we get the buses?
If we needed buses to do regular runs, we would have to contract out for buses. So we either use the BOCES or we use a private contractor, both of which are significantly more expensive than paying a driver and having the vehicle in-house.
And do we get back the 58%, almost 58% aid on that?
We get aid on some of that, not all of that. There is certain criteria that have to be met for that.
And if we had to go out of our general budget and buy or lease the buses, would we get any aid?
We would get whatever state aid we normally would receive. We would also, if we had to put it into the general fund to still maintain the cap, we would have to take other things out of the general fund. Okay. So this is why this is separate and distinct. I also want to mention, too, you made a good point. Every year we add 2, 3, 4, 5 new routes because we have children going out of district for special ed, and we have a homeless population that we're required to transport. So there are lots of other reasons to even have the backup, so to increase the bus fleet just a little.
Right, and for those of you who've never seen our transportation presentation, we send our buses to more schools outside of our district than in our district. I think we go to 48 different...
It's actually up to 52.
52 different schools. We only have 6 schools in our district. That's a lot of schools to go to. It's a lot of children to bus to places. So our buses are very important. One other item was the contingency budget. Just to be really clear, if we've got a 0% increase, then why do we have to cut $656,000? If it's a 0% increase, why isn't it just flat and zero? And the reason is because of our contractual obligations. Contracts do go up. It's something that's not within our control. And that's something that we have to meet, and it's got to come from somewhere. So that's where the $656,000 gets taken from. Thank you.
Does anybody else have any questions? Okay, thank you.
We'd like to thank you, Anne Marie, for all the hard work that you've done through this whole budget season and really keeping us apprised of what was going on and the changes within the state and all the pieces of the puzzle as they came together, rather than that last-minute dash to the finish line. I think the board has really been fully aware as the process has gone on to get us to this conclusion. It has been a great thing. Thank you for all your hard work. May I have a motion for executive session?
Motion to adjourn to executive session.
Second. Comments or questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. The board will return as quickly as possible.